Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mondays with Mike. This is kind of a tough one because of what we went through last Thursday. You know, if folks might be watching this from out of town, first of all, welcome to Fox Local, and thank you for joining us. We had an unusually powerful line of thunderstorms come through. Now, we get storms around here, obviously, very often. And we even get squall lines, which are thin, fast-moving lines of storms that come in and, frequently bring 50-mile-per-hour winds, sometimes more than that, especially in the springtime. And obviously we get hurricanes. But what happened on Thursday was so unusual. Just quick background on it. It was not a surprise by any stretch that we had severe storms. It was we had it as a Fox 26 storm alert day. We were under a flood watch beginning at 1 p.m. on Thursday. That was upgraded also to a flood watch and a tornado watch. And, we kind of knew that we were going to get some very strong thunderstorms. But what developed was called a derecho. And that's something that we don't often talk about here in the Houston area and really across southeast Texas or even most of the Gulf Coast. A derecho is something that happens more often in the Midwest, in the central U.S., sort of the Tornado Alley area, but it really could happen anywhere. It happens in other places around the world too. And so we're going to talk about what a derecho is, how it differs a little bit from what we usually get around here, which would be known as a squall line or an MCS. Mesoscale convective system. There's another phrase that's kind of fancy to use. It's called a QLCS, which is a quasi-linear convective system. Just means it's almost a line of storms. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share some graphics with you about how these things evolve and how we got such high winds with this system on Thursday. I mean, look, at this point, at the time of this when I'm speaking right now, we have had up to 8 people killed in the Houston area by these storms. Some directly, some indirectly. I think we did have one carbon monoxide poisoning that I've heard about so far. We had trees that literally crushed people. Awful, awful, awful. So let's get into it here. And we're going to begin with a look at what these storms are, how they got started, and how these, turned out to be particularly stronger than we usually get. So started out, sort of like any other severe weather type of day. We had some scattered storms that were forming in an increasingly moist environment. So we had increasing levels of humidity, both at the surface, and then when you go up into the atmosphere, we had something called a low-level jet. And that's faster winds that are coming in out of the south and carrying humidity from the Gulf of Mexico. So that really helped to sort of escalate things. And then after that, it started to get a little bit more organized. And so the storms become linear in nature, meaning you get a line of thunderstorms. Now, initially, that line formed to the north of Houston in areas that had already been inundated with heavy rain. So the focus early on really was on the heavy rainfall threat for places like Huntsville and Livingston that just experienced massive flooding about a week and a half ago, and now received about another 5 inches of rain from this system on Thursday. But it quickly started to look sort of worse and worse as we headed into the late afternoon, and by around 5 o'clock, 5:30, looked like it was getting pretty nasty as we started to have this line forming, this linear system, or what you call a QLCS, quasi-linear convective system. It sounds fancy. I mean, look, linear just means it's like a line, and convective just means that it's going up and down, that, warm air is rising and cold air is sinking. Stuff sounds more complicated, really, than it actually is. So what developed here was this bow shape. It's called a bow echo. And we get those with some frequency. You'll see them if you really pay attention to these severe weather outbreaks across the country. You get these all the time, these bow echo signatures, which generally are associated with strong winds, and also you can get a little twist at the top and at the bottom. They're called bookend vortices. A vortex is just spinning air or water, any fluid. And so that's actually what happened with this one, too. We actually did end up with a couple of tornadoes confirmed. So from here, it started getting more and more organized. And the thing is that when it develops into this bow echo shape, you can get, and I'll show you here graphics in a minute, that it allows the opportunity for some dangerous wind, because the wind that's aloft in the atmosphere, that's maybe 3 or 4 miles up in the atmosphere, can mix down to the surface, and the wind up in the atmosphere is it's blowing much faster than the winds at the surface. And so if that gets mixed down, that can cause some trouble. So the bow echo formed, and then the bow echo stayed on the ground for a long time, which is why it was more than just your ordinary mesoconvective system, or MCS, and turned into a derecho. So this is the storm setup sort of looking from the side. So that what I was just showing you was like a radar view. This is what it looks like in sort of simplified terms if you're looking at it from the side. Excuse me. So you have this thunderstorm cloud that's developed, cumulonimbus cloud. And you'll see there on the left-hand side, wind flow. So this wind in the upper parts of the atmosphere was blowing in from the west. And I was looking back at some of the computer model, what we call a vertical profile or a sounding, and it was blowing at about 100. The maximum winds were about 110 knots. So we're talking about somewhere around 130-ish miles per hour. Maybe it was 100 knots, which would put it at about 115 miles per hour. But regardless, very fast winds upstairs in the atmosphere. At the surface, you have what's called an updraft. And you can see these lines kind of flowing into the cloud. That's warm air rising. And it can rise because it's warm, or it can rise because there's almost like a suction that takes place up in the clouds. There is a phenomenon called a diffluent or a divergent flow of the jet stream. And it's like, imagine the top of the atmosphere being pulled apart, and something's got to take its place because it creates like a vacuum. So the air rises to take its place. So that was the situation as all of this started to develop. All right, so next is when we start to run into some trouble. So the upper level winds, which are those ones that are 3 or 4 or 5, even 6 miles above the ground, they start to mix down to the surface, which forms gusty winds. And also, by the way, colder winds too. You'll notice that a lot of times before a thunderstorm hits, right, you get that kind of rush of some colder air coming in. So that's the rain-cooled air that's coming down out of the cloud. But it also is heavier than the air around it. So that rain starts to fall. It gets pulled down by gravity. And as it gets pulled down, it actually can transfer some of this energy from the top of the cloud into the bottom of the cloud. So you have this wind flow coming in, it cools down, and as it does, it creates this phenomenon here called a gust front. The gust front, you've probably all felt a gust front. It's when you go from hot and humid to you kind of see the sky getting darker. Maybe you hear some rumbles of thunder, and then there's this whoosh of colder air coming in, and all of a sudden the temperature drops by 15 degrees. That's the gust front. It's similar in many ways to a cold front, but it's not carrying cold air from anywhere. It's just the cooler rain-cooled air that's coming down out of the clouds. And so if the storm is stationary, that happens a lot like in the summertime. In the summertime, you'll have a storm that just pops up because of what we call daytime heating. So like it gets hot, and the storm pops up. It's really not moving very much. And then you have this drop in the colder, drier air, and it kind of whooshes out in all directions. When the storm is moving, though, and when it has strong winds pushing it, they all kind of get pushed in one direction, down to the surface. And that's one of the things that can lead to some more powerful winds. Okay. Next is the gust front. So you have this colder air that's pushing out ahead of the storm. Well, what else is ahead of the storm? Humid air and warmer air. And so as that cold air comes in and lifts up that warmer air, you have new thunderstorm development. And it's kind of like it keeps stacking up. It's a sort of a feedback that just keeps moving and moving and moving. It lifts up. The warm air creates new thunderstorm clouds, which then drop cold air, create another gust front. So you see what I'm saying? It kind of like just keeps itself going. And that's how these things can stay on the ground for a really long time. Because as long as there's a supply of warm, humid air, this whole process can keep going for tens of miles. And in the case of what happened on Thursday, hundreds of miles. So with this strong thunderstorm updraft, this is what we would get on most ordinary days. This is what we would get in the summertime, almost every day, and it results in heavy downpours. But the setup that we had here was that really strong wind flow coming in from the west, which fed into the storms. So let's take a look at how that situation evolved. So in the case of what we had on Thursday, we had a particularly long-lived bow echo, a particularly long-lived line of thunderstorms. Now, there's some disagreement as to how long these storms have to be on the ground, or how long it has to travel, how wide it has to be in order to be classified as a derecho. But in general, I've seen definitions of anywhere from 250 miles to 400 miles. And I've seen approximately 60 miles in diameter. I think it's one of those things like you'll know it when you see it. You know what I mean? Like if that makes any sense. But those are the basic definitions. The wind gusts have to be severe, which is at least 58 miles per hour. So we'll round it up to 60. In this case, in hours, they were up to 100. But we had a measured ground wind gust of 78 miles per hour on the east side of Harris County, in between Channelview and Highlands, not too far away from Crosby, south of Crosby. And then up at the elevation of the top of the skyscrapers downtown, it was probably more like 100 miles per hour. And who knows, maybe even a little more than that as the wind gets funneled through those buildings downtown. So that's why the system was classified as a derecho and not just your ordinary line of thunderstorms, because it stayed on the ground for such a long time. This map is a little surprising. So this is actually climatology from NOAA. What do I mean by climatology? It means this is an average. It's like a 30-year average of where derechos take place. And you'll see they don't really get derechos in the western U.S. There's too many mountains. And interestingly enough, Florida is not included in this area, even though they did get our derecho this past Friday morning, because it hit us on Thursday. It hit them on Friday morning. But the area that, as far as historically, on average, is most likely to get a derecho is northern Arkansas, southwestern Missouri, and parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. Notice, though, that purple area extends all the way up here to places like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Cleveland, Ohio, Indianapolis, Chicago, St. Louis, down to Shreveport and Dallas. These are all places that do get a derecho approximately once a year, believe it or not. Now here in Houston, we're kind of on the border between once every 2 years and once every 4 years. Now derechos do come in different strengths, just like a hurricane or anything else. The one that moved through our area was particularly strong, with 100 mile per hour winds. Remember, that definition of derecho that I just shared with you is at least 58 mile per hour winds. So if we had 60 or 65 mile per hour winds, yes, that would be bad, but it wouldn't probably have been as deadly and as incredibly destructive as the one that we had was. This is a look at when derechos are most common, and guess what? The month that they are most common is May. And we are, of course, in the month of May. So May, June, July are the 3 months where we have the most derechos. You have the fewest derechos in the winter time because usually you don't have these sort of convective systems in the winter. These mid-latitude systems tend to produce winds over a wider swath, and you get blizzards and things like that. They can happen, most certainly. I mean, look, we had a Pasadena tornado last year in January. So you can get really severe weather in the wintertime, but by and large, May, June, July is when we see the majority of derechos across the United States. Also, by the way, I did get some pictures from folks before the storms came through, and the sky looked particularly ominous, right? Sometimes the clouds have that bubbling kind of appearance to them, and those are called mammatus clouds when they look like they're almost boiling. They're called mammatus clouds, and that is actually what you're looking at right now. This is what it looks like from the side. From the bottom, that's what you would see, sort of those undulating clouds. Sometimes they're called like undulatus, where it kind of looks like it's going like that. So that's what precedes the storm. That's that initial gust front. It's also known, if you want to look it up, as an Arcus cloud, Arcus, Arcus, or shelf cloud. So this is the derecho that got us. Just incredible. So it began actually just off to the northwest of Houston in Waller County, and then moved into Cypress, Texas, which is in northwest Harris County. There were 2 tornadoes that were confirmed there, one in Cypress, one west of Cypress in Waller County. And then once this bow echo formed and tore its way through the Houston area, it began here. Now, I don't have this pointed at downtown because it was going to cover up and be confusing, but I just was putting that blue line so that we could measure. So it moved through the Houston area, moved across Louisiana. It actually brought, I think, wind gust above 80 miles per hour to the New Orleans Lakefront Airport on Lake Pontchartrain. From there, it moved past the Florida Panhandle and plowed its way into central Florida. It made it all the way north of Tampa and actually made it through Orlando. So in all, it was more than 800 miles that this thing traveled. And in fact, over there in Orlando, I was talking to my friend, my colleague Brooks Garner over there, who's a meteorologist at our sister station in Orlando, and he was texting me that morning like, basically, can you believe this thing made it all the way here? He said, we just got an 89 mile an hour wind gust at one of their ports there along the Gulf Coast. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So that's what happened with that. Now, in the aftermath of all this, we still, at this point, at the time of this recording, which is just before 12:30, we have still about 250,000 customers without power. Let me rephrase that. We have 250,000 households without power. They always say customers, and it's like, well, you know what? There might be 3, 4, or 5 people that live in that house. So we might have as many as 1 million people with no electricity in their home right now. And so a lot of people have turned to the next best choice, which is a portable generator, gas-powered generator. I will tell you that I personally have a propane generator, and I love it. I've tried the gas ones. They're messy. They're dirty. And I got this one. It doesn't produce as much wattage, but when I tell you storing those tanks like you would for a gas grill, storing those things in your garage, I feel way better about that than storing, containers of gasoline that can go bad and can spill and all that stuff. So you might want to look into that. They also have dual fuel ones. That's the one that I got. It can run on gas if you wanted it to. Unfortunately, we did, I believe, already have one fatality. One person lost their life because of carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide, you can't smell it, you can't see it. And most of the time, you never even know that you're being exposed to it until you pass out, and by then it's too late. So my very, very cursory knowledge of how this works in the body is it messes with your red blood cells' ability to carry oxygen. So you pretty much internally kind of suffocate. So it's nothing you want to expose yourself to. So how do you avoid that? Well, never use a generator inside your house, which I think most people know. It's too loud to put in the house, right? But you never know. Look, some people make some, you're stressed out, you make a bad decision. Don't leave it in your garage. Now, I know why a lot of people would want to leave it in their garage because, frankly, they're afraid it's going to get stolen. I can completely understand that, but you just can't do it because it's going to gather up all of the exhaust, including carbon monoxide, in your garage, and it can leach into your house. No other enclosed spaces, even like an outdoor patio or something. You can't do that either. You have to keep the generator away from anything that's open to the outside, like a window, because that can pull in the carbon monoxide. You also have to leave it far away from anything that's going to pull air into the house in one way or another. The other thing is you could start a fire if you don't have the proper extension cords to connect things into the generator, or to connect the generator to... Oh, and also don't plug the generator into your house plug. That might work, but you also can get electrocuted, and you can electrocute workers on the outside of the house. So it's against electrical code to do that, by the way. So let's definitely not do that. Let's see. I also wanted to share with you one other thing that's unrelated, and that is that this is kind of like a changing subjects here, but I just wanted to quickly let you know that the air quality is going to be not so great around here over the next couple of days. Just something to keep in mind because we do have some smoke that's in place. This smoke is out over the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to be pushed into Houston by these muggy Gulf breezes that we have in place. I have them just some not so artful arrows here to show you the direction that it's going. And I do have a model here that I wanted to show you that tracks where the smoke is likely to go. So this is today, and then notice here heading into Tuesday, we're kind of getting that thicker flow of smoke coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. So back on camera here, full screen. A few thoughts about this. So if I didn't mention, Derecho is Spanish for straight. Derecha is right, and izquierda is left. But straight ahead, basically, and meaning like straight line winds. The term was actually coined back in the 1800s to describe these long-lasting windstorms where they noticed that basically it would like knock down all the trees in the same direction, unlike a twister, a tornado, that we know is spinning around. So these systems have been known about for a long, long time, and they've been called derechos for a long time. You're going to hear it a lot, though, because, it's, you know how it is. I mean, look, whenever social media or the media in general gets a hold of a new buzzword, you're going to hear it a lot. In fact, there was another derecho that just took place yesterday in Kansas, and I mean, I just showed you that map showing how common they are across that part of the country. Like Kansas, Arkansas, Missouri, they get them pretty frequently. So you're going to be hearing a lot about it all over social media and on TV and everything else. But the bottom line is it's not common here. What I want to leave you with, though, is that severe thunderstorms can be, not always, but can be just as dangerous as tornadoes. So if you hear that you're under a severe thunderstorm warning, you should really treat it as if it were a tornado warning, or at least respect it. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to always run to the bathtub and cover yourself with a mattress, but you might have to. But I think in general, we don't want to be outside. You want to resist the urge to go outside, try to get video of it and things like that. You're going to have to just say, forget about the car, it's too dangerous, that kind of thing. So anyway, just all of our, hearts just go out to the families of those whose lives were lost in this sort of, extremely powerful line of severe thunderstorms. Yeah, it's just absolutely awful. So I hope everybody gets their electricity back soon. Hope you learned something, and I hope that we all learned, myself included, to respect these squall lines when they come through. Sometimes they won't be derechos, and they can still cause considerable damage. So thanks for joining me here for Mondays with Mike. Like I said, I hope you did learn something. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Try and stay cool this week. It is going to be a hot one. And I'll see you again right here on Fox Local next week. Or on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube. And, oh, before I go, shout out to my mom and my brother in Florida, where they just missed out on the derecho. Good thing. Okay, see y'all soon.